And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. Today on a Sunday, we are ready to go with a big super panel to review the Unidentified TV series, and we are ready to go. Let me bring on my co-host Chant, and she's going to introduce our panel for today.
I'm going to do that. How are you, Frank?
Doing good. Ready to go.
I am ready to go, too. This is going to be a great show. It's the Unidentified History Channel show series mega panel that we have to review all 6 shows. And we have on with us today Dave Beaty, the filmmaker of the Nimitz Encounters. We have Earl Gray, who's the assistant state director for Southern California and the chief investigator also. We have Dr. Irena Scott, who has a PhD from the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine, and she also served on the MUFON Board of Directors. We have Mann, who is the state director of Arizona MUFON. We have Hurd, who is a MUFON field investigator with Phoenix MUFON, a podcaster with Rogue Planet TV, and soon-to-be published author. We have Jeff Krause, who is the state director for Southern California of MUFON. We also have Dean Alioto, who is an award-winning filmmaker and works on film and TV, and his first movie was UFO Abduction, and was the first ever found footage movie and has caused a stir in the UFO community for 3 decades now. We have Keith Arem, who is one of the leading directors in the game industry. Keith has directed and produced over 650 titles, including Call of Duty and Titanfall, and his first motion picture, Phoenix Incident, featured an immersive viral marketing campaign generating over 20 million engagements worldwide. Welcome, everybody, to our show.
Hey there.
Hey.
Hello there, Chant.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hi, Frank.
Hey,
Good
how
to
is
be
everybody?
Here.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, everybody. And let's not waste any time, and let's get right down to it. The final Unidentified show aired this past Friday night, but we had a little bit of a pregame show. We had President Donald Trump being interviewed by Tucker Carlson over on Fox News. And the question was asked about UFOs. There was some chatter that proved to be nonsense regarding Trump possibly saying a little bit more than he did during his previous interview with George Stephanopoulos a couple of weeks back. And he didn't go any further than he did with Stephanopoulos with Carlson. But still, the question got asked. The president did comment. And any thoughts on all that? Anybody?
I would sooner a monkey quote Shakespeare than to expect anything sensible about UFOs to come out of the president's mouth.
All right.
Hey, don't hold back on your opinion there.
Well, I know that's kind of biased. Sorry, monkeys. I didn't mean to put you in a bad light. But the chances are greater that they would have an intelligent statement regarding the subject of UFOs than Donald Trump, who can't even make a sensible statement about hamburgers. I
think that's nonsense. I'll get off this conference call immediately if you don't lay off the United States president.
Okay, bye.
That's not what we're here for, folks. Honest to God, that's not what we're here for. This is a wonderfully great nation, and we're not here for a president bashing. So let's get on with it.
And they might smash your airport too. So gotta be careful.
Amen.
All right. So obviously that's pretty much that on that. Again, he didn't really add anything to his earlier comments, and that was basically it. Nothing happened basically with the Carlson Trump interview. So let's get to the show. Has everybody been following it?
Every episode.
Yes, we have.
Multiple times.
And in total, what's everyone's opinion on it, on the show itself?
I think it was a groundbreaking series. It showed everything in a different light than the way things have been presented.
This is Earl.
Yeah, this is Shane here.
You first, Shane.
Thanks, Earl. I was just gonna say that I think the show did what it needed to do in terms of bringing a serious spin on it to a largely uneducated audience. Yet for those of us who are, familiar with the topic, it still was a great presentation. And, we'll talk more about later, I think, what it all means. But I really enjoyed it and was impressed.
It was more than just a TV show. I think some people were probably tuning in and thinking that they were going to be getting Ancient Aliens Part 2 or something, but this wasn't just entertainment, that we were being told something very poignant and groundbreaking. And it changes the way that we have to look at the phenomena even. It was a very good show, and more than a TV show. It's disclosure with a small d, but disclosure nonetheless.
But to put a nice human element.
I agree. This is.
I think it was amazing to have, legitimate sources commenting on the footage and be able to analyze it and be able to sort of present it in a neutral light and pose a lot of questions that a lot of us would normally have, both experienced in the phenomenon and the mainstream public. So it was important that it got discussed in that light.
This is Dean here. It felt like it was really good foreplay. Like 5 episodes. It was built, some of them were the same.
Dean, let me ask you this. Is there any such thing as bad foreplay?
Yes, there is. I've been told before.
Okay.
And I mean, there were some moves that were repeated several times, but ultimately there was a climax to it, which is good.
Since
my.
since we do have you and Keith here with the filmmaking backgrounds, would you have done anything a little bit differently?
Yeah, I would have put my name on it. I would say overall the production value I thought looked really good. The visual uniform color palette of like gray and muted blues is pretty cool, but I would have mixed that up per event. I feel like the biggest disappointment was that I want to hear more of Tom's maybe original music in there, because he's got
that might not have been in the budget.
Maybe not. He could have thrown some music in there from his
He underscored Tom till the end, till the last episode. He wasn't really, he was kind of walking around, and I think they did that purposefully.
I think so too. Yeah.
But nice about the feature, the prominent interviews there. But I thought that by bringing in sort of recreations and footage of actual jets was sort of a mixture, because you saw the real footage contrasted by sort of the recreated footage, and in some respects that gives the audience a definitive sort of view of what they think it looks like. And as a filmmaker, that's a challenge, right? Because that's your interpretation of what the events are. So those kind of liberties are a little bit challenging as a filmmaker, but I thought they did a fantastic job of just presenting it very neutrally.
Yeah.
But that's good, as long as it's shown as a representation and not the actual thing. That's all good, because it does give the viewer an idea and something to think about, which is always good. You want to have the viewer interested, and things like that are what keep them interested.
Right, yeah, because you have separate clips, right? And these are all disclosed through the Pentagon and these other qualified military sources. And it's clearly showing that airspace is being violated by vehicles of some kind of unknown origin. And it confirms what pilots have been saying for years. So Dean and I, when we do a lot of research for a motion picture, we'll always have interviews with military sources or other people that are going to give us some factual information that they'll talk about privately. And here's something that you can actually put out publicly and confirms what we're doing in fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that was interesting was that they went out of their way to have a nice spectrum of people. I like the fact that we have, in today's era of diversity, we had a female wingman witness, wing person, I guess, witness who was there. She sounded a little bit like Carol Burnett. Maybe that's just me. But I thought that was interesting because each of them were very credible. I mean, I didn't see anyone, and I've shot like 500 or more interviews over the years doing these crime reenactment shows. And usually you can tell when people are, inflating things a little bit. All of them came off very, very credible. I thought that there wasn't, any episode that you would watch where you'd feel like all right, they're really stretching to get this one. I thought across the board, if I had to pick a word for it, I'd say very credible.
What was funny is that it was exactly the same approach that we started the Phoenix incident with. We had a Navy pilot that's coming in. In our case, it was an Air Force pilot talking, shadowed, and revealing the state's evidence about an encounter that really happened. And so when I saw it starting off, I was like, oh, wow, that's very familiar territory.
Copyright lawyer.
When the footage first got released, our movie jumped into the top 10 on iTunes. Because the footage looked very similar to the FLIR photography that we did in our film. So people were thinking that the gimbal footage or the Tic Tac footage was another viral part of what we were doing for our media campaign. So it was pleasant to see that it wasn't.
And yeah, you had mentioned earlier, Keith, that the FLIR type videos are pretty easy to recreate. So what did you take away from the controversy about that? Some people were questioning the validity of those videos. Did they jump out to you and say, yeah, I can fake this? Or did you say this?
Sorry, I can't come to the phone right now.
Yeah.
That's Alejandro. We're trying to add him. Yeah.
Please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hello, Alejandro.
Okay.
I'd like to report a UFO.
Yes, sorry about that, Keith. Yeah, what jumped out at you when you first saw these videos? Did it seem like something that you could recreate yourself, or what was your opinion on them?
I mean, when we went out, I mean, you know, our budget for our film was pretty low, but we wanted it to be pretty authentic. So we went out to the Australian mountains outside of Phoenix. We shot on real military FLIR cameras. We actually shot at an altitude that was sort of respectful of where the F-16s would have been. And then compositing in any of the other visual effects were fairly easy for us to hide because we were recording at such a high rate that our visual effects teams could kind of put that in and then we would reshoot it off of screens. So you really couldn't debunk the footage. Actually, Alejandro, who unfortunately isn't here, he was one of the first people that did actually kind of expose our viral campaign. And that's how Alejandro and I became friends, because we were trying to bring an awareness to this. We weren't trying to do a fake news to sort of punk anyone. We were actually trying to inspire people to start doing the research and find all the information about what was happening, what these pilots were saying. So when I saw this footage, I was really surprised because it is fairly easy to sort of recreate it and fake it and bring in the pilot voices. And we brought in a lot of our voice actors that work on Call of Duty and a lot of the other video games we work on. So the fact that this was disclosed through the Pentagon and other military sources, I think was the most important fact, because the footage really is very easy to fake. And looking at this footage, I still do question sort of the origins of what it is.
Let's talk about that for a second. The biggest criticism that I've seen is the gimbal, right? The rotation of the ship. I've seen criticisms over and over on it, which is oh, it's the back of like an F whatever jet, and it's turning and it's banking to the left, and actually that's inaccurate. If it banks to the left, the whole thing moves to the left. This kept its plane. It wasn't going further than the distance, losing it. It was a side. We were tracking them going parallel to the object. So if it turns sideways, it's gonna maneuver straight to the left. So right away, that's wrong. And also, they look at the shape of the back of it and say, well, it's the back of a ship, because you look at our craft, a jet. You look at the fin, it is protruding like that. Well, that's not a fin. That's the heat signature. And so there was just a little bit coming, a little plume, if you will, coming from the top and the bottom. And so for me, that was the biggest thing, which was that there was really no heat signature on most of these. It was just moving along, and the reactions, as I was talking to Alejandro about, to me, the most credible thing was the reactions. You listen to these guys. I've done countless crime shows with U.S. Customs officials, SWAT, all these guys. I judge how they react to any situation as how dangerous it is. If they're making jokes and everything, then I know I'm okay. If the jokes stop, I know we're screwed. If they're blown away, I'm going to hear it. And these guys were like a bunch of kids who were in between talking the code that they would normally do. They would drop these, oh my God, holy shit, and they're dropping the F-bombs. So, Keith can do all of these things. So it's kind of like...
He can drop F-bombs too?
Yeah, I can drop a couple of F-bombs every once in a while.
So if you can recreate to an extent, but again, you look at the messenger. I'm going to go back to The Godfather. You look at who delivers the message. And the fact that it was Lou and he was, credible and had this background and everyone else around him, and the fact that the government's now come out and said, yes, we did release it. It's like, okay, it's over. There should be no more controversy on that. Let's move forward to the next step, which is, what else are they holding?
You've reached the maximum time permitted for recording your message.
Alejandro has
Press 1
all of
to
that.
listen to your message. Press 2 to erase and re-record. Press 3.
Press 3.
Oh, well. Okay. Now, Dave, I wanted to jump in and ask a question of
Are
you.
you still there? You have reached the maximum time permitted for recording your message. If you are satisfied with your message, press 1 to listen to your message. Press 2 to erase and re-record. Press.
Okay.
Press 3.
Okay. Okay,
So
Dave,
Earl.
I had a quick question for you. Now, when these videos first came out, there was, of course, the audio to go along with it and the pilot reactions. It was kind of up in the air for a long time as to whether or not they were legitimate. They got some criticism from John Lear, among others. And it seemed to be confirmed from the show that that audio was, in fact, legitimate, that the pilots, Graves and a coin, confirmed that. They recognized those voices. Has that finally done it for you? You're convinced that the audio and the video are legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, from the very beginning, in I've always been a fan of military history, and I've always read everything I could find, memoirs and so on of pilots going way back. And one of the first things that you figure out is that they have intercom systems on their planes, and especially, when there's like two guys in a plane, if you have a weapon system officer and a pilot, they're just kind of bantering the entire time. Now, if that's recorded, then you're going to hear this is not being broadcast out over the air. So even, from the wingman jet and the lead, they're just kind of like basically BSing with each other. So I think that's what you're hearing. And when people criticize and say they would never say that over the radio, well, they're not really over the radio. They're on their own intercom frequencies. They never expected that to go out to everybody to hear, probably. So yeah, I believe that. I mean, I never thought that, it's rotating or, that whole thing. I never thought that was off at all. So
the only stuff that was scripted that I noticed was when they would have, Luis Elizondo would go and like he's interrupting a recording session over at Tom DeLong's studio and stuff. And what impressed me was, that certain parts were certainly scripted, but it did not seem contrived. They did a really, really good job about that. Everybody was fully in on this. They wanted to be heard. I mean, this was meaningful to every pilot, every person that was involved in this production, and there was no corniness to it, and it did not seem contrived. And that's hard to do unless you're being fully honest and straightforward, and that really came through for me. And I thought that was a really good thing about this show.
And another thing I think was interesting.
Wait, hold on, Frank. Dr. Irena Scott, what is your perspective regarding the Unidentified Channel series? Can we have a little bit of input from you on that?
I thought it was great because interviewing the pilots and the radar operators really was convincing. You didn't have to take it secondhand. You got it right from the horse's mouth. And then also the way they checked for jamming and the way they merged the signals from the two ships, the Princeton and the Nimitz and things, I thought was really good, convincing to people.
Thank you.
I did. I lost my train of thought there.
Okay, well, I haven't. I wanted to let everybody know that my understanding from input from the UFO community, that a lot of folks felt that this show was proposing the idea that ET craft, also known as UFOs, could be considered a threat to our world. What is everybody's take on that?
This is Jeff Krause here. Looking at the picture that they showed from the evidence on that episode of the shot to the rotor blade of the helicopter, I noticed, for one thing, the shot was to the rear part of the rotor blade, and it looked like it was just enough to throw out the balance to where they would have to land. And I'm pretty sure if they wanted to, they could have just incinerated the whole helicopter. Now, they were pretty tight-lipped about the circumstances beforehand and after.
Okay, yeah, you're talking about the Italian case now.
Right. And, that showing the evidence of the attack like that was, pretty big. That's the first time that there's proof of an interaction between a so-called UAP and any type of other air vehicle. But again, I got to reiterate, it looked like it was more meant to be a crippling blow than an actual attack meant to cause serious damage. And so, again, you have to think about intent. And we really don't know the preceding circumstances to that. They're pretty tight-lipped about that. But it also brings up the question of how they knew that they could fire on a UFO and what happened after they did.
Yes.
Well, I thought that whole exchange was pretty interesting. It goes back to October, I think, of last year when they went over, DeLong and Elizondo went over to Italy and made their little presentation. There was a live stream of it. We were able to watch it live when it happened. It was pretty interesting. Remember it was a Saturday morning, our time, I believe. And it was very interesting. Really enjoyed it. Elizondo went through his history of UFOs, and I thought what they included in the show was pretty interesting. As it was basically they were sitting at a table, Elizondo, DeLong, and the Italian UFO people, and they were basically sort of negotiating for material. And it seemed like Elizondo was not giving up too much, and they wanted whatever they could get from the Italians. And going back to earlier this year, Alex Cianetti, a South American researcher, was on our show, and he had discussed that basically Elizondo and DeLong tried to hook up the same deal with other countries in Europe, like England and France, and they weren't able to get that done, but they were able to get it done with the Italians. It seems like the Italians took their offer. I thought that was pretty interesting, and it seemed like that whole thing was sort of played out before the cameras, that whole negotiation process, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And a thumbs up to Alex for giving us that information several months ago. I thought that was really interesting. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
It's because they're Sicilian like me. That's why.
It was really telling seeing Elizondo's reaction to hearing that, too, because he actually genuinely looked floored when he heard that.
Yeah.
What did they do to provoke?
Going back to Chant's question, I have to say that I agree about the threat thing. I mean, going back to the beginning with To the Stars, it was pretty much framed as the ATIP was, which was a DoD program. And I think that throughout this series and each episode in some way or another, they were always reinforcing that, this is possibly a threat. And that, Congress should look at it as far as perhaps a DoD mission that needs to look at this as a threat to national security. Now, whether that means they want funding for Bigelow or something like that, I don't know. But I hope that not only that they also try to get answers as to what these objects are, and that might be more scientific study versus, a Defense Department study.
This is key. And so I think one of the interesting things is go ahead.
Yep, Keith.
This is Shane here.
Hey, this is Keith. Sorry. So there's a little bit of a delay. What's interesting is that there is a history that does date back of a number of encounters that did have military presence. That's what I thought was really interesting that this echoed back to. You saw that we did have military encounters back in Iran in '76. There was other incidents that happened in Peru back in the 80s, and the whole Belgium wave incident that you had where you had F-16s engaging craft. And this is very similar to all of those. That's what we were investigating, what we were looking at Phoenix, and I met with pilots that were having very similar experiences where they're actively engaging the craft. So when you hear the same type of stories being echoed, but now coming out in mainstream media and then the Pentagon releasing the footage, that sort of gives a little bit of credibility that we have engaged before and that there is a potential threat. If you have something that's violating your airspace, we're obviously so defensive of our borders, but when you have something that's coming in over the air, that's a real challenge because these are technologies that we didn't think are even possible. And if there's an enemy force, it doesn't even have to be alien, it can be just another country, but that's a huge threat to the country.
Can I ask, I want to ask, there were two things that were a big question for me that no one's talked about yet, or I haven't heard us talk about it yet, let's say, which is this the first time a UFO has ever struck out on a plane, shot a plane? Because I know that they've been known to do that with the missiles, with the test missiles that were set up, and they would hit the cone, the cap, with like a laser. But is this the first time that a vehicle has ever been, struck by an alien ship? And then also, I'm really curious about, I don't want to skip over episode 1, where there was something in the water, this submergible craft that was bigger than the Tic Tac, and that they had with them a submarine with a fleet that was out doing these tests. Why didn't they send the submarine out there? They had the coordinates and everything to do a pass. But anyway.
Yeah, Dave, you might know a little bit more about this.
Well, in the executive summary report, the captain of the sub, the USS Louisville, now he doesn't go into specifics of that coordinate, but he said that entire workup, they didn't have any unknown sonar contacts that whole week, which is sort of an interesting thing, considering it seemed like there were things in the water, like you said.
Yeah, at one point they said that it was traveling twice the speed that we're able to go, 7 knots or 700, whatever it was, twice as fast as the fastest submergible, sub that we have. So
and here's some information though. Here's some breaking news. Gary, who is in Unidentified, he's one of my witnesses, and within the last couple of weeks, he's sort of retracted that story. I was watching Unidentified today, some of the episodes, and I'm like, wow, they're going to have to change that, because Gary is now saying that the guy that told him that, the sonar tech, basically was, lying to him or made it up or something like that. I mean, I'm not exactly sure why somebody would tell another sailor, but the reason why he's saying that is because 2 or 3 senior sonar men have come forward after seeing the show and kind of got in contact with Gary and Kevin. And these guys are like, no. And they kind of even gave the technical reason of why the Princeton couldn't have really had any underwater contacts, and they didn't talk to any other ships. So if you talk to Gary Voorhees today, you'll find out that he's retracted that.
I wanted to let everybody know who Gary Voorhees is, that Dave Beaty just mentioned, and that is a little bit about him. During his time on the USS Princeton, he was tasked with the security and inventory of top secret and classified materials, including being trained to operate the WASP military recon UAV for the Pacific Fleet during Operation Enduring Freedom. On the 14th of November, 2004, he was an eyewitness of the USS Nimitz Tic Tac event, which Dave Beaty went ahead and covered so beautifully in his Nimitz Encounters film. Shane, I wanted to ask you.
Let me jump in here and ask, just throw this up for everybody, really, because anybody can comment on this. But Dave, you helped us put together a good show with Gary Voorhees, Kevin Day, PJ Hughes, and Jason Turner last week. And what really struck me was the overwhelming positive response they've gotten since they come forward. It seems like things have really changed a lot in terms of the reaction that witnesses, especially these guys, have gotten since they've come forward. And I'd really like to discuss that. That seems like a real important shift in opinions, and they're saying it's all good. And I was very pleased and impressed to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to them on most of a daily basis, and all of them have been very positive about the whole experience. I know coming out by themselves, if it was just one person, it probably is pretty difficult, but because they came out sort of together as a group, mutually supporting each other, I think that just being able to openly talk about what they saw all these years later has been vindicating and sort of like a relief. So, yeah, I would say that's been very positive for them.
And one last question for you, Dave. You had to be as surprised as everybody else when they actually did feature the lady pilot, even though she was in shadows and is remaining anonymous. That had to be a bit of a surprise for you when she turned up on the show.
Yeah, the whole time that we were researching this from the very beginning, I kind of figured out that there was this female pilot, but no one, back in 2018 in the winter there, no one believed that there was a female pilot, and now to see her on this show and actually coming forward, I think it's wonderful. I mean, they're all heroes, really. These naval aviators are America's heroes and so on. And to obviously step forward to talk about something like this that does have stigma attached, I know. And, you know, I get it that she's in the shadows and everything, but it was really good to see her. So,
Dave, I had a question for you. Can you envision a full congressional hearing specifically for military pilots who have had UAP encounters? Or anybody want to chime in on that?
I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're very interested, because if you're watching the series as it goes along, Chris Mellon is like working the Hill. He seems to be having meetings with people, and then they say, okay, these pilots that have come forward from the Nimitz encounters have already had briefings with Congress earlier in the year, and now they want to talk to the people from the Roosevelt. I know that there was a congressional or a senator's aide contacted Kevin Day last year. He shared an email with us that the guy told him he shouldn't have done later. He just kind of, that's Kevin. But I think that there is an interest probably spurred by TTSA in this whole thing. So, yeah.
One of the things that we noticed when we were interviewing pilots for our film was that there's this huge fear of retaliation. When they do make a report, they're subjected to submit a psychological evaluation after their report. And so they're questioned again if they want to file a report, given the fact that they're going to be given this psychological evaluation. And what we found is the majority of them don't want to file, mainly because they don't want to have that report on the record.
That sounds like that was Dean Alioto talking, right?
That was Keith.
Keith. Oh, Keith. I'm sorry. So sorry about that. I'm sorry to interject, but I wanted to ask Shane what his prior point might have been, even if it was like, a long time ago. What was Shane going to say? Shane Hurd, field investigator for Phoenix MUFON.
Yeah, thanks, Chant. It was regarding the show Unidentified and the question that you'd posted about UFOs as a threat. Now, we know a large segment of the UFO population, they don't really like that concept. UFOs really have not identified themselves as a threat. You're still breaking up a lot, Shane. However, Chris Mellon had mentioned in the show, the very goal that they're trying to achieve is to really get our politicians on board with researching UFOs. And ultimately, I'm sure it's getting dollars. But the point is that he made is that the television program, the individuals on it, these are intelligence officials, they have NDAs and their security clearances. They are within a system, a political system, to move this idea forward. So they're walking this fine line and doing this dance about, saying what it is and what it means, but doing so in a framework using the words and the concepts that are acceptable to the political community. So, what I'm saying? So even if they don't really feel they're a threat, you have to say that they're a threat to move this thing politically forward. So, whether it's an actual or perceived threat, doesn't matter. The point is they're trying to get Congress to act. And to get Congress to act, you have to frame it this way.
I think it's also fair to say that any advanced technology of unknown origin is a potential threat. That's what the military views it as.
Our own good friend Rich Hoffman had gotten some word, I believe it was from earlier in the week, from Louis Elizondo regarding the videos.
Anyway, go ahead.
That are being shown on the that we're seeing now. That actually Congress has already gotten to take a look at some far more significant and compelling video as part of their hearings. Do we have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, he said that we just got a taste and the congressman got to chew and swallow the whole thing. I think he said something like that. It's pretty interesting. So obviously there's other videos that are out there, right? I hope we get to see those.
That was
Yeah,
one
same here.
disappointment. I was hoping that we were going to get a little, maybe a fourth video. And we did get the photographs from Italy, and that was, definitely enticing and thought-provoking. But we didn't get a fourth video from them. The provenance of the people coming forward, though, it's bipartisan. We've got Harry Reid was involved. We've got John
Warner
Haines was involved. Yeah. In the Department of Defense, they're doing their job. I mean, they're supposed to assess threats, and this is what they're supposed to do. They're not UFO buffs, They're there to assess a threat. And so that's them doing their job. At AlienCon, they had a panel on unidentified, and I'm trying to think of who it was that was on there. I want to say Chris Mellon, but I'm not sure that it was him. But they were saying that while this is, the way that they are bringing this forward, because they have to call it a threat, that's, Department of Defense, that the people that are involved over to the Stars Academy don't see this as all just being a threat. This is just the position that they have to take. Being from the military and the Department of Defense, they have to assess this in that way. But he was saying that they're somewhere in the middle, that they're not saying malevolent or benevolent, And I think that's really a good stance to take, because we don't know. I mean, it's unidentified. We don't know what their agenda is. As Jeff was saying earlier, it's a good thing that, to know that when they hit the helicopter, they didn't hit the leading edge of the helicopter rotor blade. It seemed like it was to stall the helicopter, not to kill.
See, I got to take exception with that, only in the sense that how would they know that the pilot would be of a certain level of skill that he could negotiate that helicopter down with that kind of little, shot to the propeller? It feels like something else must have happened. Again, this is historical, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've never been attacked by one of these vehicles. So that needs to be marked in history. This is the first time. And second, why are they doing that? I mean, that's a whole thing to unpack. Why were there fires there? Why didn't want the helicopter flying over there? There was nothing to reveal. The whole thing, a whole other story that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, going back a ways, there have been pilots lost chasing UFOs. The Mantell case is pretty famous, and also there's the Kinross case with
that's user error. They were chasing after them.
Right.
They were not attacked. So
exactly.
Sorry.
Okay, I wanted to bring up a data point that Rich Hoffman, who's on the board of the Scientific Coalition for UAPs, brought up to my attention. He said, Lou Elizondo's work represents the first time a member of the U.S. intelligence community has come forward to speak coherently and scientifically about the phenomena. This will hopefully prompt other members of the intelligence community to include former directors of national intelligence and former directors of the Defense Intelligence Agency to lobby the U.S. Congress to take a bipartisan stand in lifting the veil of secrecy on this subject and allow an open public-private study of this issue. I just wanted to get that in on Rich Hoffman's part.
Yep. And another point I'd like to bring up is during the Unidentified show, for the first time we had an active duty pilot. I believe Danny Aucoin from the more recent 2015 East Coast case is still an active duty pilot. And according to what I've got, Ryan Graves is a former pilot, so I'm assuming he's out. But this is the first time we've seen an active duty pilot coming forward and in recent years and talking about a UFO case. So I thought that was another step in the right direction, a big deal.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the show. Obviously, having these guys get the Roosevelt pilots on the air was amazing. I mean, no one else has been. I mean, I know that Rich's group, the SCU, tried to reach out and contact some of the Roosevelt aviators and some of their commanders, and I don't think any of them would go on the record because of their status. So,
Dave, you get points for saying Roosevelt and not Roosevelt.
Hey, I want to say something about the helicopter too, because I've been listening to you guys. One of my friends, Joe Murgia, has a blog, and he posted last week, I think, it was Grant Cameron who was on Fade to Black, and he went on and said he knows these Italian researchers, Paulo Harris, I think one of them, that said, that they twisted that case, that the helicopter, supposedly according to them, wasn't actually shot down by anything. It didn't like shoot a beam or something, but it was forced down by some type of electromagnetic problem. Yeah.
All right, damn
it's just interesting, but that's Grant Cameron. So if anyone's interested, you can look at that that blog.
Got it.
I wanted to bring up Richard Doty. Was he brought up a little bit, Frank, during this show?
Yeah, during episode 5. I've got that on my notes here. And I thought that was pretty interesting. He seems to be working his way back into the news again. And they took a little bit of a segment and basically dedicated to that, to kind of knocking Doty a little bit, and Elizondo stating that he is not Richard Doty. Doty is a guy who likely has been involved in leaked documents, that type of thing, to the UFO community over a period of years, decades now, actually. And he was in for a little bit of a drubbing there from Elizondo, and I was wondering if anybody on the panel had any thoughts about that. That came as a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled to see Doty getting one's attention, even if it's negative. I mean, we saw his presentation at the UFO MegaCon, and he basically spoke for an entire hour why he wasn't to be held responsible for his actions in the Paul Benowitz case, and I just found it very insulting. And this he's up to his.
Well, I mean, he's still doing it.
I just can't understand why ufology.
Yeah, he's still out there.
He's an admitted, proven misinformation guy. I mean, come on, this is an enemy of ufology, not anybody to be paraded out at conferences and talking. See how great he is. It's I'm offended by him.
Well, Dave, you got to meet him when you were out there in Nevada. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
I didn't meet him, no, but I knew he was there. I knew he was there, but again, some of us that were kind of around during the whole Benowitz case and read that whole thing, it just resonated with us. And going forward, we're like, wait a second, this guy, he really, really ruined this guy's life, and there's, so some of us are like, look, I'm not going to even pay attention to Richard Doty. So
understood. Basically, I know for a fact, and I've heard from a number of different researchers, he's still out dangling, I'll tell you everything I know, and ET is really from, we know that they're really from Zeta Reticuli, and so on and so forth. And it's just ridiculous, and it is disappointing to see what I think might well be some of his work getting passed around now. We're spending a lot of time on some other shows that we've done going into all that, but his name has finally come up, and he is saying that the documents that are floating around out there now that are getting a lot of discussion are legitimate. I have no idea how he would know that. But, that's about where we're at with Doty right now. And I was kind of surprised, but glad to see Elizondo, because his track record has been pretty solid. The witnesses he's brought, the details that they bring with them, that is pretty solid stuff as compared to the fiction that Doty's been involved with over the years.
Yep. Bingo.
Dr. Irena Scott, do you have any more input to share with us on this series?
Well, I guess Doty's been a disinformation agent for a long time, ever since they showed up in UFOs Live in Profile on that TV show a long time ago. And he presented himself as a real government agent. And then he's been presenting himself that way ever since, although he's a disinformation agent from what he presents.
Understood.
It's pure disinformation. I mean, Richard Doty is, you don't want to listen to that guy. He ruined Paul Benowitz's life. I mean, you could actually say that he's responsible for his death. That's where, where it started from. Similar stuff happened to James Forrestal back in the day, and Lord knows we don't need disinfo agents. When somebody besmirches their, their word that way, you can pretty much write them off.
Well, he's given bad information to several people, like Linda Moulton Howe. I think he did something to her once.
Yes.
And a number of people.
Giving him an extra 15 minutes of fame.
Huh.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is that this has gone on long and generations of people, coming into ufology, and they don't have that past experience with somebody like him, or there's some other cases, like the autopsy video and stuff where, this stuff gets recycled now. And so, even though people spend a great deal of time and effort, verifying or disqualifying that kind of information, all that effort only to be repeated another decade or 2 decades later, and it just keeps coming up and resurfacing, and some people think it's real and others know it's total BS, but you still got to grind it out and waste the time and effort on that when we have these huge exciting things that are happening with TTSA and the Nimitz case and the Roosevelt case and all of those things. So it's kind of a shame, but I guess it's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, the stuff is
car on. He's trying to tag his card onto the train, and we don't need it. We really don't need that. He already shoveled that pile to us 20 years ago.
I wanted to ask the panel a question. There's a gentleman by the name of Richard Haines, a retired NASA research scientist and former chief of the Space Human Factors Office at the Ames Research Center. A quote from him. Wanted to go ahead and start the quote. That's my experience in general. You are exactly right. I share your view that it is extremely multidimensional. He means the phenomenon we're talking about, being UFOs. So much so that traditional science is really not up to the task. Now, that's an insight that has come slowly over the years because I clung to science as a method, a technique to tease out these fine points and eventually get to the bottom of it. But the longer I am looking at the evidence, the less I am convinced that's the way to go. There certainly is part of the phenomenon that will yield to science, but there's a whole other psychic or psychological dimension that not even psychology is going to come close to. I can see why a lot of my colleagues are in denial about this. My question to the panel is, do you think there is a limitation regarding the traditional science standards we use in order to study the UAP or UFO phenomenon that we're talking about?
Jeff Krause here. Absolutely. We're behind their technology. We don't even know really how to quantify the technology we're seeing in some cases. For scientific tools to analyze it, let alone replicate it at this point, it just shows how much we really do have to learn still. But what it does do is show us the areas that we need to focus more questions, more investigation, and a lot more research. And that in itself is very valuable.
What kind of areas do we need more of the research on there, Jeff?
Well, and being able to catch up to the flight capabilities, for one thing, would be of a major concern, both as far as national security goes and technological breakthroughs. The energy that's used to propel whatever craft they have could answer many of the problems we have on the planet itself, be it, helping poor nations have power and clean water and food, or, perhaps even our travel to the stars. It could be the key to that. So, it opens up, quite a few things that we need to pay more attention to and do a lot more research on, and verifies that it's an actual field where, there is scientific data to get. Now, on the flip hand, I got to agree with Dr. Scott in her evaluation in UFOs today of, how do you necessarily study a phenomena that's constantly changing as you study it? Some of the things it do, changing shape while you're watching, or, changing speeds and direction, things that we have no way of replicating or measuring, or splitting into multiple objects, or multiple objects becoming one object. That's totally beyond our science to replicate and to be able to really evaluate.
And like the research of Dr. Harley Rutledge, he spent he researched UFOs in real time, where they actually had observation posts and watched them with instruments. And he reported that they were very subtle and that possibly they knew what the observers were thinking, which was a very scientific study and the only one done that way.
Yeah, Rutledge did that work back in the 70s, did he not? Or was it the 80s, 70s? Okay.
He started in 73 when there was a flap out there in Missouri.
It's like the double slit experiment where the observer disturbs the. It's not. I mean, no matter how much we want to be observers, we're on the slide under the microscope, and once you touch the phenomenon, it's interactive, and you know, it's like the double slit experiment. Whether you're expecting a wave or a particle, what you're expecting will, you know, it will cause the result that you get. So we can't really exclude ourselves and consider ourselves outside observers. It's an interactive phenomena, whether we want it to be or not. Yeah.
So then what do we do? What do we do then if science seems to be limited regarding being able to study and research this kind of phenomenon in the full breadth of its scope?
Well, science is founded on controlled experimentation, and it doesn't have an opening for things you can't control, and that's one problem with science.
Okay. I wanted to bring up something that happened during our
however,
Go ahead, Shane, by all means.
To you, I was just going to. I mean,
yeah, Shane. Pretty much everything you're saying is breaking up, unfortunately.
Data stuff that can be collected and analyzed, but when I'll just listen.
Okay, well, I did want to bring up something interesting that happened during our USS Nimitz and Princeton show mega panel, Frank and Dave, and wanted to mention how one of the guys on the show said, when I asked, do you believe that this was a UFO or one of our own, meaning one of our own crafts? And one of them actually said they felt it could be one of our own crafts.
Yeah, I think Gary was the most adamant about that. And that is kind of interesting because what we're seeing is a lot of witnesses coming forward and they sort of know what they know. They know their own experience, but they don't know the whole history and how the type of behaviors that they're witnessing is not dissimilar at all. In fact, it's very similar in bits and pieces to what we've been hearing going back 75 years now. Yes. And I was wondering if there's a little bit of a disconnect, that people need to get up on the history of all this a little bit better and not think of this as just some kind of a contemporary experience, that there is a long track record of this type of thing going on.
Dr. Bruce Maccabee, I mean, he was, you know, we were, you know, conversing on Facebook, and he mentioned, you know, I mean, this is nothing new. Everything that's being described by these pilots, you know, the 90-degree turns at Mach 5 and et cetera, that this has been reported since the 1940s. So if it was our technology, you know, I'm sure we haven't been doing this since 1940. I mean, come on. You know,
it does get into this hazy area where, you know, we've advanced so much now since, you know, the days of just breaking the sound barrier. And even not long after that, Mach 2 was broken in the early, I think in 53, if I remember correctly. And this kind of thing goes back a long ways. We know what those benchmarks were back then. Now we know what they were, and if you've got something before the sound barrier was broken at roughly 760 miles an hour going several times that, we didn't have anything like that back then. We didn't have anything like that through the 50s. Nowadays it gets a little hairier, but we know we didn't have it back then, and these UFOs are doing the same kind of thing.
It's nothing new.
Sorry, the thing that I keep hearing from everyone with regards to, this is Dean here, with regards to the phenomenon is it keeps coming back to how do we get there? And if we had that technology, we could use this and that. It feels like, especially now with the, you know, administration and the world that we're in, and the fact that we're still bickering and there's egos run by our leaders and stuff. It feels like the reality is this. We're a bunch of kids standing on the side of the road watching cars race by, and we're complaining that we can't get in and drive one of those things. We're not ready yet. We are in no side of the spectrum that is near mature enough to be able to handle technology like that. It just seems to me that these guys have gotten to a place where they haven't perverted their technology to weaponize it. And we would. We do it with everything. Most of the patents are held by the government. Every time someone comes up with a new energetic, energy, resolve, the government says, oh, that could be, whatever, and they snatch it. So, I kind of feel like the reality is, and I don't want to be a killjoy, but it feels like the reality is we should, in some part, kind of sit back and enjoy the show, take notes, but ultimately not ask them to come and share the technology with us to solve our own problems that we've created.
And this is Keith. One of the things that's kind of been frustrating for me from coming from the outside and then doing all this research and then obviously working on the entertainment side, but then actually really getting heavily involved in the research in the community and meeting with not just eyewitnesses, but a lot of the UFOologists and really discussing a lot of the issues about disclosure. And one of the things that to me was really frustrating is you look all the way back at like 1957 and you had like the Milton Torres case. And, here you've got a guy who is a pilot who engages a craft, and still we're not much further than that case from 1957. We still don't have that smoking gun that has provoked this worldwide action by the government to actually come out and talk about these things. We keep getting the reports from the pilots. We keep seeing the footage. And within the community, we know that there's absolutely something happening, but the massive public hasn't really received that disclosure. And so, like what Dean was saying, it's great to sit back and watch the show, but to be in the middle of it and being frustrated that we haven't made enough progress is the tough part as a filmmaker too, because we want to play in these stories and get the younger generations inspired to do the research, but you get swept up in all of the sort of the fake news and everything else that comes out.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Milton Torres case because he is an amazing witness, no question about it.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to see him, I think his accounts are over there on YouTube, and you can go just basically search for Milton Torres, Torres, is I believe the way he spells it, and watch his account of his case over in England back in the 50s, and it's an amazing case.
I have two things I want to bring up. One is Jan Harzan, the international director of MUFON, went ahead and gave me a quote on the History Channel's Unidentified Series show. I'm going to go ahead and begin the quote. On the heels of a wildly successful Project Blue Book on history recreating the Air Force's investigation into UFOs 50 years ago, Unidentified brings us to the here now of what is happening with UFOs and our military today, especially with U.S. Navy. A big shout out to Tom DeLong, Lou Elizondo, and the entire team at TTSA. Keep up the great work. MUFON continues to be the people's voice in UFOs, receiving nearly 1,000 UFO reports each month from the public, including the military pilot, law enforcement witnesses, as well as the general public. I think it is safe to say that disclosure has happened, and MUFON looks forward to taking the subject to the next level and leading the discussion with the general public on what this all means. Stay tuned. I would also like to introduce onto the show one of our friends, Dean Ashley. Hi, Dean. How are you doing today?
Hey, pretty good. How are you doing?
Hey,
Doing
Dean.
really well. I was wondering, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your background briefly, and then telling us your perspective regarding the Unidentified History Channel series show?
Okay, my background is I was an aviation electronics technician in the Navy. I got out back in 2000. Been working on like aviation and computer electronics for the last, however many years, 19 years. So what I worked on was like video guidance missile systems, the SLAM ER, and now I work on infrared cameras for a government agency as a contractor.
That's fantastic. I know that you saw a few of the Unidentified shows. What did you think of them? How were they for you? What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I thought they were pretty good. Down to earth, pretty basic. There wasn't anything that startled me or it was a revelation. There was some cool things. Like last episode, I liked the Italian government trying to work with our government, and I thought it was actually pretty well written, well done. Like I said, down to earth.
Frank, knowing Dean's background, did you have any questions for him?
Yeah, I did want to get into the videos a little bit. You did some study on those, and have also taken a lot of FLIR video of different types of aircraft, and wanted you to talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was looking at just random things online, and I came across the Aguadilla UFO case, and I got in contact with Rich and Robert over there at SCU, and we discussed things, and they put together a report, and I did a little bit of trying to help them out with the videos, and after that I got an interest in it, so I started recording things, mainly aircraft, but also other things that are flying in the sky, so you can differentiate what looks like to be a jet, what would be a bird, or that's why I started taking all these videos, just to get like a rough idea of what we're looking out there.
Got it. And getting back to the show, I thought that one, not entirely a surprise, we always expected it to be true, but some things were confirmed as part of the show. And one of those things was that there is an inside team within the intelligence community. I'm assuming it's the Pentagon that TTSA is working with. And I wondered if anybody had any thoughts on that.
Well, there was that one big meeting. This is Dean OG.
Hey, Dean.
There was one big meeting at the final episode where they all got together and they tiled in the Unidentified show. They tiled the officials that they were meeting with, and yet they were meeting in a hotel lobby with I don't know how secretive you're going to get with so I don't know.
This is Earl. Just a quote from Luis Elizondo, and I thought that this was really kind of interesting. They haven't really stopped, the Pentagon, has not really stopped their investigation. That goes on still. He said, in the DoD, two things occur when you have an organization. There's paperwork when you start a program, and there's paperwork when you end a program. You will not find any paperwork that ended ATIP. So I thought that was very interesting. It's not like this has been handed only to the public. The Pentagon is still very actively, assessing this. And of course, they're assessing it as a threat, because that's what they're supposed to do. That's the Pentagon. That's what we, elect our officials to do. But I thought that Luis Elizondo was very forthcoming in that, and he did let us know that this is not like it's like the officials have lost interest in this phenomenon. They're very interested.
And there's a few unusual things that we have not seen. Number one, all we have seen is information from the Navy. We haven't gotten anything from the Air Force, which I think is quite interesting. And we have also not heard anything about the most famous case that took place while ATIP was in operation from, I guess it was, 08 to 13 or 14, somewhere in that time frame, we have not heard about the Stephenville case. And I wondered if anyone has any thoughts on that, because I love that Stephenville case. I think the witnesses are awesome. It got that entire community, that all of Erath County, pretty worked up into a UFO fever lather back in 2008. We haven't heard anything about that, and I think that's awfully interesting, and we'd certainly like to know more.
Yeah, that's probably just too sensitive, and it's not going to be dwelled upon until they get their head around it. But I was going to also add, hopefully you guys can hear this, to Earl's point, is, within government, you have the higher level is a program, the lower level is a project. And just like, ATIP was really a project level versus OSAP, which would be a program level. And there's really two budgets, right? In and self-contained, organizational division that you're within, and those can come and go. However, one can continue on, and the program budget is again on a different level. And so it is no shock or surprise to me whatsoever that the claim is that ATIP, started and didn't. But again, project level, they're currently, before and after this one. And it may be continuing in either the same name or a different name, but that $22 million was really
okay, yeah, you're breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit, Shane. Unfortunately. So, Chant, what have you got?
I wanted to ask Dr. Irena Scott if she had any more input she wanted to share.
Well, I suspect the government probably has been secretly studying them all along someplace, but they're not having any leaks now. I suspect that because of working for the DIA, and when I worked there, I thought it was probably something going on way at high levels.
Dean, earlier we brought up the perspective that some folks are taking away from the Unidentified series show, and that is that it appears as though this show is making it look like UFOs or ET craft are a threat to us. Do you believe that's correct, that the show is doing that? And do you believe that they, being these ET crafts or ETs, are a threat to us if they exist?
Not sure which Dean, but I'll try.
Yeah, either way. Yeah, go ahead and jump in, Dean Alioto.
Dean Alioto or Dean Ashley.
I'll call for the rest of the show. I'll call you Mr. Alioto. Is that okay?
Oh,
Mr. Alioto.
No, you just call me. Oh shoot, he's A as well, so I can't do Dean A.
Just call me. You can call me.
Gosh. Okay. Dean Alioto here. No, they're not a threat. How are they a threat? They're dancing around us, kind of going, "Come on, kids, come over here. We're doing our thing here. We're studying this, whatever. Shoot. Sometimes it kind of like go back off a little bit. But again, on the spectrum, we're still not mature enough, and so they're doing their thing. They know what they're doing. We don't. On this planet, we don't. I mean, all of our decisions. Sorry, sound like I'm a cynic here, but all of our decisions are made of greed. I don't know what their decisions are, but so I feel like if they line up and start forcing us to do something, or corralling us or land them and say, all right, we now declare this planet Zignot or whatever, and they will. Until then, they're doing their thing, studying like we do, like Irena's done with the bonobos. This is part of the research that they're doing, and it's a great glimpse into the future of what we will, if we don't wipe ourselves out, be possibly capable of.
Okay, Dean Ashley, what is your take on what we were just talking about?
I'm a little bit more skeptical. I think I don't know what it is. I haven't ruled out a DARPA project, something of that nature. It doesn't look like aircraft to me, the way traditional aircraft moves in the sky. And, I see it every day. I'm pointing flares out the back. We're looking at this stuff. I would tend to lean more towards alien spacecraft, but, I can't positively say that because all we're looking at is a black orb that rotates. I can say that it's not typical, and I haven't seen anything like it in my 13 years of working on the thing. So by process of elimination, it's something I'm not familiar with. That's kind of where I'm going with it. But I have no idea what they would be doing here. I don't know if they're like teenage aliens taking the car out. I speculate just like you guys do, but I'm sure you're better at it. I would just have my own little theories.
I wanted to bring up something that Dean Alioto brought up a while back, and that is that he had I don't know, he sort of had been amused about the term UAP, which seems to be the nomenclature, I can never say that word, of the military. Thank you. When they bring up UFOs, they use that term UAP. Dean Alioto, what is your perspective on that acronym UAP?
A rose by any other name is still a rose.
Bingo.
It's fine if that's what you want to like rebrand it, because UFO has been kind of satirized into the ground. That's fine. I don't, I have no problem with that. The one thing that we're not talking about is we're talking about flying objects, right? And so when I heard the term disclosure, and maybe this isn't the right forum for it, but we're not talking about the alien abductions, which that to me isn't cool. That to me is jacked up. If that is even happening, that to me is disclosure. They're disclosing themselves to 40 million people on the planet. I did the math on it, and according to Yvonne Smith and Hopkins, all these guys, they said that it's it averages out to be about that. So I'm going, all right, so disclosure is going on for some of us. I've been to a support group meeting. I audited one, and it was terrifying because these were the most credible people I've met who were architects, doctors, lawyers, and all of them were sharing the same story. And so for me, it was like, okay, so they're the chosen ones. Man, the way life is right now, I don't want to be chosen. I'm fine. I'll read about the other people taking one for the team. But so I don't know. This might not be the right forum for that.
It is the right forum.
UAP, but I think UAP, it's fine if that's what they need to call it, and that and that prevents them from playing the soundtrack to the X-Files in the background. Then go.
Okay, Dr. Irena Scott, what is your take on that? After all, you are on the board of the Scientific Coalition of UAPs.
Well, my take on that is kind of personal because my sister and I were almost killed during a UFO experience, and that was very personal. I thought we were going to die, and so I think possibly they can be dangerous, but I don't know why or how or anything else.
Okay, good point.
How were you almost killed? Sorry, that's fascinating.
Well, while we were having a close encounter, a man stopped and talked to us and acted very crazy. And then when we got on the freeway, we were going to turn around on the freeway and come back and look at the object. He just chased us. And I switched lanes and everything you could think of, speeded up and slowed down. He stayed right there and blazed his headlights into my mirror so that I couldn't see. And it was a very dangerous thing. I finally escaped by a weird way, and we survived, but I thought we were going to get killed.
That was in a semi-truck that he was chasing you in.
It wasn't a semi. It was a big U-Haul.
Okay, yeah.
And anything else before we take a look ahead and what we might be coming up against going forward? Any other final thoughts on the show itself before we move on to what we can look for going forward?
I think the show was a great sort of opportunity to be able to not just talk about disclosure, but just showing that this might be a statement, right, of anything, regardless of what the craft ultimately are. It's sort of a statement, that if they're not engaging, they're just sort of parading around and demonstrating this sort of technology to our military, and also, from what we've talked about, what's happened in public, it is sort of a big statement to say we're here. It doesn't necessarily need to reveal aliens or any of the other things that we can sort of fictionalize about what they may look like. But here you have craft that are documented by the military and the government, and they're clearly displaying themselves and saying, "Hey, this is what we're here. Our show of power."
I was thinking too that this show really is one of the most significant things to have happened in ufology in 70 years, in that it is confirming what many in ufology have been saying for.
It's been taken seriously too.
Decades, that the government, in fact, is interested. Yeah, that's huge.
Yes, the show, I would say, I would call the show really an unqualified success. So that's my opinion on that.
But Frank, why do you call it unqualified?
Because I think they achieved what they wanted to do. They put together their message their way. They worked on it. Looks like from conception to the show's finale. Looks like they got everything done that they wanted to get done. They told their story their way.
So Keith Arem and Dean Alioto wanted to know, do you think that we're going to see a flurry of more UFO-related themed shows, TV series, movies come out just because of this unidentified series, any more than we normally see?
I think so. I think you're going to see a huge uptick just because of the validity of the show, and something that's presented so factual is incredibly rich in ideas for fiction and telling a what if story based on what happened. There's so many interesting characters and people involved in these stories based on real life events that I think that's always what good storytellers are looking for, is really grounded in real characters and real events. So you can imagine how many things have come off of Roswell and Area 51 and all the different reports of people who've seen things over the years. But now you actually have something in this generation that's inspiring, a whole new wave of people, enthusiasts, to really do the research and look at it. So I think you're going to see many, many more shows.
My good buddy, Ryan Sprague, has been offered all these shows to host. There is going to be a flurry, definitely, of reality shows. I've kind of developed a couple myself, but I find that I'm leaning towards spending my time doing what both Keith and I do, which is delving more into the fictional stuff and telling stories and using that as a background and trying to expound on it and take it to a fantastical level that is grounded, that is based on what we know now. So there's definitely going to be more. It's cyclical anyway. I mean, geez, some of the people on this panel have been around in the weeds, like Earl Grey and everyone else way back, and you can see how it comes in cycles and stuff. And right now, this isn't a new cycle, but we've never had the government come out like this before. So maybe this will have more longevity.
And anyone else want to jump in?
Well, the conversation has been sort of put into hyperspace. I mean, where I used to have to talk with people and they would roll their eyes and they would say, well, you're a UFO investigator. How can you investigate something that doesn't exist? Et cetera, et cetera. I don't really hear that so much anymore. Now, people are actually willing to talk honestly and with no eye rolling and no Chant was saying, no X-Files theme music playing in the background.
I think
it's normalized it.
Earl, really quick, you say you're getting a change in the reaction. In my everyday life, I really don't see a whole lot. I don't hear it talked about, just as far as normal everyday type things. Obviously within the community, it's gotten huge. But as far as everybody else, and we've seen the ratings from the show, they've got, a million and change viewers. Not a huge number. It's not like it's topping the charts as far as even cable ratings are concerned. Is this really getting out there? Is this word really getting out there amongst regular folks who aren't especially engaged in the field? I mean, I see some evidence that there's a little bit of an uptick, but not that much.
I think it's an inconvenient truth for people, I mean, and people do return back to their normal soap operas. My wife and I, started watching Stranger Things again last night, I mean, people are going to do their usual stuff, but it has changed the tone of the conversation. And again, none of this is new information. I mean, we've been hearing about UAP, UFOs, whatever you want to call it, for many, many years, with the exact same properties that these craft have, breaking Newton's laws, the laws of thermodynamics, right angle turns at Mach 5 and such. We've been hearing this, for many, many years. But for myself, what I've noticed is that people that once were not willing to talk about it now are actually willing to talk about it. That's just on a personal level. I've just noticed this. If I go somewhere and I'm talking with somebody I've just met, and they find out that I'm a UFO researcher, it used to be that I got a stranger reaction from it. Now people want my business card. They're more apt to say, I saw something back in high school or back, a couple years ago or last week. People are more forthcoming about their information because they don't think that it's synonymous to being, like a tinfoil hat wearer. To be trying to understand this phenomena. So I think that, it slowly seeped into the public purview of what the phenomenon means and where it's coming from. And, again, our visitors are elusive. I go back to the Eagle River sighting back in 1961, where this guy saw a UFO. They asked him for pure water. He gave it to them, and they gave him buckwheat pancakes that they cooked on this interstellar hibachi, And I love that story because there's just such a, it's like a Monty Python skit. But what I love is what the ET told him. He said, "We want you to believe in us, but not that much." And I think that it's the same thing. It's like if you are an attendant of a wild animal park, you're tranquilizing lions and you're putting tracking devices in them and et cetera, you want to see how they react to things in their normal environment. You don't necessarily want everybody to be thinking all the time, "Oh, I'm being watched." And I think that it's probably the same kind of thing. They want us to know, and people, especially the military, it's gotten to the point where they have to leak some of this. It's a pressure cooker. It's ready to blow up. So they're not going to hand us abduction stories. But, it took them 70 some years, but here we are. They're finally willing to talk reasonably without rolling their eyes about vehicles and that we're being visited. And that, to me, is a good thing. It's progress, albeit slow.
But Earl, are we outdated as a general public? Are we outdated as private citizens from the military sectors regarding the possibility of their actually having and coveting technology that could be at the level of ET level technology, so to speak?
Ben Rich said back in 1994, he said that we have the technology to take ET home, but it's all locked up in black projects. So the public will never know about it.
And so how do you feel about the reality of that? Do you think that some of these UFOs are really ours?
I think, personal opinion, and that, you can't buy a cup of coffee with that. But my personal opinion, after speaking with many aerospace engineers who have seen stuff, in particular the black triangles and some of the, the variants on those, they tend to see them near Lockheed, the Lockheed base over in Palmdale. People see these and they report them. And one thing that I keep on hearing over and over from these guys, after I see their badges and after I check their credentials, is, "Do you know how I can get on this project? I really want to work on this." So, yeah, I think that possibly and probably some of these are our own. The ones that look manufactured are probably ours. If it has nuts and bolts, it may be of human origin.
And Dean Ashley, how do you feel about that possibility that some of these UFO reports are actually possibly ET-derived technology that the military-industrial complex, as Dean Alioto was stating a little earlier in our chat, if that's a possibility, what do you think about that perspective?
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind. Let me think. There are some aircraft that I've seen that, and some videos taken with FLIRs that can be explained as aircraft. And, upon further evaluation from people, outside, some kind of debunkers, scientists, people that get together and analyze these things, they have categorized them. And, there's much more information than just a video. You have air traffic control and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think there's a mixture of both in all. I think there is some unexplained that I would have no idea what they are, and then some that can be easily explained.
Dr. Irena Scott, can you chime in on that, and then Shane after that?
Well, I'd refer to what Stanton Friedman referred to as Special Report 14, where the Battelle Memorial Institute did a good study of characteristics of UFOs and came up with that most of them are misidentifications, but some of them, with a whole lot of information, aren't misidentifications, and that they came up with the probability of less than 1 out of a billion that well-defined UFOs are not prosaic objects.
Okay, Shane.
Yeah, I was thinking too that without a doubt, we have technology that is 20, 30 years, in the making before we see it, the U2, the A12, the F-117, the B2, all those things. But everything that we have created, apparently, it works on the basis of thrust and lift. And if you see a UFO performing in a way that is not utilizing thrust and lift, and I highly doubt that's ours.
Good point.
So you're saying you don't think that we have any kind of anti-gravity craft? Dave.
It's possible, absolutely possible, but especially when on the battlefield and where a technology like that could prevent it, I would have a hard time saying we're withholding that kind of technology when it comes down to, the shedding of blood. But, could be wrong.
Okay. And what do we see going forward? The TTSA show is wrapped up now. Unidentified is in the books, and that work is done. I did see a comment from Chase Klutsky this week where she had said that basically the Unidentified show covered what they were doing last year, and now it's this year, and they've been doing a whole lot more. What do we see happening going forward here for the rest of the year? Anyone?
I think the next show, the sequel, should be called Identified.
Good one.
That's good. I like it.
Not sure. I don't know how you top what you have because.
Hopefully there'll be.
That was facetious. Everything hasn't been released, so until they release something new, then there'll be a sequel. And so it definitely felt like they were holding back a little bit, and supposedly Bigelow's got some actual material that he's procured that he has that they've been analyzing and stuff. So maybe the next one will be getting more into the physical evidence.
Yeah,
which
they didn't touch on that at all during the show. I thought that was kind of interesting, and it got a lot of talk in the early aftermath, going back to the New York Times story, but it was not in evidence at all during the show. That was interesting too.
Regarding the topic of metamaterials is what you're talking about, is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Atom Project.
Right.
Yeah.
TTSAs.
And there's some other separate project. There's the Valet Nolan study that's going on too, and that's where the proof is in the pudding on that. We'll see if anything comes up regarding that as we go along.
Okay, why don't you think the Identified show did? Why do you think the Unidentified show did not bring up metamaterials, Frank?
It's a good question. Not really sure. My only guess would be that they just don't have the research done. They haven't come up with anything that was worth going with at this point.
As Shane was saying, from their Atom project.
Yeah, did you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think they wanted to focus. They had certain criteria that they wanted to bring up. They wanted to bring up the objects. They wanted to bring up the pilots' reactions. They wanted to bring up the politicians. They wanted to show that there was provenance to this, and they just didn't have time left over to do it. They had 6 episodes. This had an arc, it had a beginning and an ending to it. And I think that they achieved what they were hoping to achieve.
Yeah, they covered some pretty dense material pretty well.
Yes. It wasn't for us. I mean, it was for the general public. And it was very different from an Ancient Aliens episode.
Yes. So it's kind of like baby steps. Again, this whole spoon feeding thing is
Yes.
You know, you've got to bring everyone up to speed in a in a logical and controlled way. You don't want to freak them out. Don't want to overwhelm them. So I suspect too that they're holding off on that because that will be a part of season 2 if there is one. So
yeah.
I mean, what a great story that could be, right? Metamaterials. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
the provenance of it. And what
Certainly
they
an
are,
episode's worth
the
should be in
implications.
there.
Oh yeah.
And we know Dr. Irena, she worked over at Patel Institute back in the day, and supposedly they got the metamaterials from Roswell. You know, what do you think about that, Irena, if I may interject a question?
Well, I think there's pretty good evidence that something was sent from Roswell to Battelle. And we found one person that said he had studied those things. And when they set up the study, they hired metallurgists. And so a lot of people wondered what's going on. But the person I know that tried the best to find out and actually interviewed the people that knew something about the study just didn't say a thing, except one of them said, "We are concerned." But that's all she got out of him.
Well, that's pretty good. It's good that they're concerned too. Yeah.
All right, so we're just about to wrap up. Does anyone have anything to say in summation?
Good job. I mean, that's all I have to say. I mean, it was not just another UFO show. They set out with a purpose, and I think that they accomplished it. They brought the conversation to a new level, and cheers and carry on is all I have to say. And I'm really heartened that it seems like these guys want to work with other UFO investigatory groups. They haven't fought against MUFON. They haven't fought against any of the other, teams that are. They're realizing that we all have our role to play, and there are certainly enough UFOs to go around. And so I'd like to applaud that aspect to the show. And let's hope. I'm sure there's a season 2 as well. So, good job, good attitude.
Yep. Anyone else want to jump in before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think people ought to mention that UFOs are more respectable now because of that. And if somebody, rolls their eyes, we'll tell them, check out the History Channel.
There you go. There you go.
Right.
Really is good and shows something.
I did.
To the living room.
You're right. I did have one last question for our panel, and that is, do you believe that the Unidentified series show is a form of propaganda in any way, shape, or form?
Everything is propaganda. Anytime it's on the air, it's propaganda. So what does that mean? You're stating these are the findings that we have. But I mean, that show literally, to be honest about it, I think Keith would probably back me up, and so would Dave, is it could have been done in 1 hour. So that's the reality of it. I mean, come on. So it's kind of like this long tease, and ultimately it's, it serves a function. We can't exist, on the kindness of strangers, as Blanche Dubois would say. It's part of the business. And so it's a way of doing it in a story or in a compelling way that's of interest. And so, at the end of the day, what is the final message of that? Spielberg is the master at that. Close Encounters. That was a message of communion, connecting. And that's okay. That's not bad. But anyway.
As far as Keith and Dean, as far as the ratings are concerned, I don't know if you had a chance to look at them. It seemed like they actually held the Ancient Aliens audience, and they even grew it at least a little bit in a couple of the results that I saw. Are those ratings good enough to keep the show going?
Oh, definitely. I think that's going to be. You're going to see anything that's important enough to bring the mainstream press and covering this and keeping that conversation going is going to be something that's going to produce more content and raise awareness. So I think that the fact that they did those numbers, albeit maybe a small footprint, is pretty significant given the size of the community and the topic that they're covering.
And anyone else?
More interest.
The Scientific Coalition for Ufology did an excellent study too of the whole Nimitz and everything.
Yes, they did.
Got it. Okay, so yeah, let's wrap everything up. We had a great show today covering basically a review of the entire Unidentified series. We touched on a lot of points. A lot of interesting things came up that kept us all at the edge of our seat and surprised us a little bit. So that's always a good thing. It wasn't all just rehashed. They had some new material for us. We love the show. Can't wait till season 2. And I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. And thanks for joining us. And let's go through the lineup. Shane Hurd, Earl Gray, Dean Ashley, Jeff Krause, Jim Mann, Dr. Irena Scott. Alejandro Rojas was not able to join us. Keith Arem, Dean Alioto, Dave Beaty, of course. Karen Berard also was not able to join us. But fantastic lineup, a fantastic show. And thanks, everybody. And we will see you when we do our next show. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, guys. That was
Good
awesome.
job.